Okay, good morning, officers, councillors. Welcome to this first, well, I was going to say economy and development, but it's actually a joint session this morning of economy and development and stronger communities. The rationale for that is that during the budget scrutiny process, because there's service elements or service functions, operational elements and service functions that stronger communities would normally function, and now under the auspices of the enterprise budget, it was more prudent that that we have a joint session so members from both committees can look at all and cover all the service areas that normally would be separated. But it felt it was more prudent that we do it this way in a combined session. And just for obviously just for councillors' purposes and those members of the public watching in. Because of this combined session, everyone has equal voting rights. So if we do come to potential recommendations that we need to look at and that requires a vote, there's equal voting rights for both sets of members of the joint committee. So if we do a set of introductions then before we get into the agenda as formal. So I'm Councillor Paul Pavia and I'm chair of this committee.
Hazel Eilert, Scrutiny Manager.
Robert McGowan, Scrutiny and Policy Officer.
Francis O'Brien, Chief Officer Enterprise.
Dave Loader, Central Finance.
Peter Davis, Chief Officer for Resources.
Phil Murphy, Cabinet Member for Resources.
Councillor Jez Becker, Economy and Development Select Committee.
Brian Strong, a member of this committee.
Richard Roden, Councillor for Dixton with Osbaston Ward, Monmouth, and member of this committee.
Councillor David Davies, St Kingsmark Ward, Chepstow, and I'm a member of both of these committees.
Councillor Alan Davis, I'm the Deputy Chair of this committee.
Good morning, Councillor Roger Harris, Cresson Ward, Abergavenny, a member of Strong Communities Committee.
Councillor Dave Evans, member of West End Ward, Caldecott, and a member of this committee.
And Councillor Tony Easton, member of Dewster Ward, Caldecott, a member of the Strong Communities element.
Thank you very much. So in terms of first agenda item, apologies for absence. Do we have apologies, Hazel?
I've got two apologies, Chair, from Councillor Smith and Councillor Feekins.
I've also got an apology from Councillor Dimmock, who's the chair of the Stronger Communities, who for work commitments can't be here this morning. So item 2, declarations of interest. Any formal declarations at this stage? No? Okay. Just if there are declarations, obviously ensure you raise them before you speak and then fill in the pro forma and hand it in at the end. Okay, thank you. Item 3 then, public open forum. There's no one from the public to raise anything this morning. In terms of the next agenda item, scrutiny of capital and revenue proposals, it was felt that during the pre-meeting that we would move to agenda item 5 first, so the budget monitoring report, because members felt there were some elements there that could feed into the capital and revenue item. So if we're happy to take agenda item 5 first, so budget monitoring report, 7, report for quarterly scrutiny. Francis, is that you? Oh, so Peter, is it? Oh, thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for receiving these reports today. I think as certainly members of Strong Communities who I met with last week, and again, as the Chair has just touched on, there were aspects of the budget proposals, aspects of month 7 that were duly scrutinised there. Clearly, for good reason, has just been outlined. Economy and development, strong communities coming together to consider and I guess in the main, those proposals that sit under the Enterprise Directorate. Speaking to Hazel from a scrutiny aspect, it was felt that I get the broad input that I gave to Strong Communities, and apologies in advance to those members of Strong Communities who've had this already last week. But I think for those members of Economy and Development Select, it certainly felt worthwhile last week, me just providing a broad context in terms of where we are both in the current year, and as the Chair's just touched on in terms of that order and sequence, in the current year with month 7, and clearly some very significant challenges that we're facing at the moment, and how those then fall into next year and add, I guess, to the challenges that we've got going forward. So I think the sequence and the order is important, and you'll understand that by my inputs both around month 7 and then in due course around the budget. So first off, in terms of month 7, and just coming back to that point in terms of those significant challenges, those of you who've digested the report that's in front of you, you will see that we are carrying a significant set of pressures through the current year. The bottom line forecast outturn position is just shy of £4 million. That is unprecedented at this stage of the year. That is not something that we have entertained, and certainly not in my time in the authority, and I've been here for 17 years. That presents an array of challenges for the council, and in arresting that position and in putting a recovery plan in place for the current year. So I'll come on later. I mean, the report clearly covers wider aspects in terms of school budgets, in terms of capital and the capital programme, but the core aspect of my input will be around the revenue budget and where the principal challenges are being faced, and certainly for this committee. So just in terms of providing that broader context, and before we get down into those matters that specifically relate to the committee itself, it's worthwhile, I guess, members just sort of casting their eye across Table 1, which sits below 3.2 of the report, and where you can sort of get a feel for how that £4 million overspend is manifesting. So the challenges that we're facing, and most significantly, position themselves around a number of areas that I can contain on one hand. First off, children's services. That is by far the most significant pressure we are having to contain at the moment. We are seeing an ongoing and significant increase in the number of children, looked after children, that we are having to provide support to, both in and outside of the county. Very expensive placements, and as you can see there, just shy of a £2.8 million overspend against the budget. What we're also seeing, though, which again, a position that we've very successfully managed within social services in recent years, adult social care is also starting to exhibit pressure. You'll see a £676,000 overspend being reported in community care. A very significant element of that is to do with adults with disabilities, and a pressure that is going and is actually featuring again in the budget proposals that we'll come on to in time. Beyond that, it's worthy just to mention again, just to provide broad context, the significant pressures being faced within the Children and Young People's Directorate, principally around children with additional learning needs. Again, and similarly with the point I made around children's services and looked after children, a lot of significant, an increase in the number of pupils that are being, in effect, statemented and are needing, obviously, further and additional and expensive support. It's worthy just touch on, and I'm not going to steal Dave's thunder, just in terms of when I hand the baton over to Dave, just to talk about matters specifically around your collective brief. But you will see in the broader sense, enterprise carrying an overspend of 613,000. Dave can again, provide some broad context around that in time. So in terms of what the authority is looking to do to arrest that position, I guess myself, Francis, other members of the leadership team, together with other officers and through our DMTs, our Directorate Management teams, we initially brought together a recovery plan and a set of savings that we felt we could look to very quickly put into effect and to a point where they would benefit the current year and again mitigate the overspend position that we've got. It's probably just worth highlighting that, and I guess this sort of exemplifies where we're at as an organisation at the moment. We have been very, very successful in recent years in terms of protecting frontline services, and we continue to do so even in our budget proposals. But the ability for us to be able to bring, for example, significant in-year savings forward is made more and more difficult the tighter the budgets get. So in that £3.99 million overspend that you see there in front of you in Table 1, that already takes effect of the measures that I guess directorates and chief officers have taken to sort of things that are within their direct control. So, you know, the hatches have been battened down, non-essential spend has been curtailed. We're obviously being very prudent in terms of vacancies that are arising and filling those only when necessary. So we are taking all the measures that you as a select committee would expect us to be taking as officers. I'll draw you then down into 3.10 of the report, and a small table that in effect encapsulates the wider extent of the recovery plan. So there are in effect three aspects to this. The first of those is some additional, in effect, windfall grant that we've had from Welsh Government. So just for members to understand that, we prudently made budget provision in the current year for both teachers' pay and pension increases. Welsh Government actually then subsequently brought through funding to compensate us for aspects of that. And we have had a windfall element as a consequence. So we're drawing clearly on that aspect to help us. And then you'll see two significant items then. One around the Ealing judgment and the decision that we've taken around that in terms of exemption around leisure services income. We are in a position at the minute, and I'm getting regular updates from our VAT accountant and our external advisors who are handling the recovery of claims back from recovery of monies back from customs. So we've attached a very, very high probability to the recovery of monies. As you can see from the text there, that we're taking a sort of a midpoint in terms of the potential range on the settlement with customs. But our external advisors who have very successfully recovered monies right across the UK from customs, we have got a very robust case, a lot of very good supporting evidence to provide. So from a Section 151 perspective, I'm comfortable with bringing this figure into the recovery plan. The final item then, that £2 million relating to Capitalisation Directive, and just to sort of simplify what that relates to. So in the past, Welsh Government have had in place a mechanism called the Capitalisation Directive. It allows a local authority to actually put a case forward to Welsh Government to actually treat money that would ordinarily be seen as being revenue and allowing us to treat it as capital and to be able to fund that through capital receipts. It was a very protracted process. It required ministerial consent. There was never guarantees around that being approved, etc. But Welsh Government, to their credit, have had the foresight to create flexibilities for local authorities. So what they've done now is actually pass that responsibility to local authorities to take the decision as to whether they can, in fact, whether they can in fact fund relevant revenue costs from capital receipts, and just for the select committee to understand, that is principally around costs associated with service reform. So we've had a very extensive piece of work done, and thanks to Dave, other accountants who have done a really good piece of work in working with budget holders to really drill the expenditure that we've been incurring and are incurring through the year, and to look at those matters that directly relate to the guidance that Welsh Government has issued and around service reform. And and again, from a Section 151 perspective, I am comfortable that we have been able to bring together just over £2 million worth of costs that fall within that guidance. And given the challenges, as I've said, in the current year, has allowed us to actually displace that expenditure into capital and to fund it from capital receipts. So I think I'd like to just give you a level of comfort that, we've got, I feel, a robust recovery plan in place to arrest the in-year position. It's still not without its challenges. We're sat here at the end of January. We've got a couple of months left of the year. Finance teams are looking to undertake a sort of quick and dirty assessment of the current position. And I guess from my perspective, I want a level of comfort, as does our senior leadership team, on whether the pressures that I've walked you through, children's services, ALN, etc., as to whether they are still exhibiting further strain. Because for those of you who will be familiar in terms of the upward trajectory, we've gone from month 2 to month 7 and some really big increases through the year. It's not very helpful to have an outturn report land on my desk which highlights a further increase in overspend when it doesn't allow us any time to be able to respond to that. So, as I said, I've got the finance teams on that at the moment. And I guess as officers, we will look to react and respond accordingly if there are any further, obviously, pressures coming through. So just in terms of revenue, in the broader sense, that's sort of the broad messages. There are, within the revenue budget, and as you'll know from the budget process that went before, there are a whole array of budget proposals and savings. There is an element of those that have either been delayed for various reasons or for a good reason deemed to be unachievable. And 3.12 of the report highlights, provides some sort of analysis around that. Again, if members of the committee want to draw anything out there, then I'm sure Dave will be happy to provide some clarification. In terms of capital, not too much to worry about in terms of this committee. We've just at top level, we've had an underspend which is predominantly within 21st century schools, and around the 2 school builds we've had at Caldecott and Monmouth. And again, Dave may want to refer to it just in more specific detail. We are seeing slippage at the moment at month 7 of 1.772 million. That's referenced in 4.3 of the report, and a number of those areas of slippage do fall within the remit of this committee. But what I just do want to highlight you to, just so that you make the links, and just so your understanding, for your own understanding, if you do refer to 4.5 of the report, and in terms of the usable capital receipts that we hold, which are obviously one of our key sources of finance for our onward capital programme, you'll see two figures lower down on the table in 4.5 relating to Anticipated Capitalisation Directive application. So when I've just talked to you about using this flexible use of capital receipts and displacing cost from revenue to capital, clearly capital receipts is financing that. So our capital receipt balances, our available capital receipts balances are impacted as a consequence. So that just over £2 million you will see denting our capital receipt position in 1920. And we are looking to use that same mechanism as part of the budget proposals, which I'll come on to later. And you'll see a further £1.4 million draw on capital receipts, and again, as part of the budget. I'm not going to talk too much about reserves and school balances, only to say that the situation remains as before. We are not blessed with significant reserves. We are not. we always require very prudent management of our reserves. They remain at a low level, and we're probably just about within the prudent thresholds that the 4 to 6% threshold on our council fund. In terms of earmarked reserves, we are seeing an ongoing decline in those reserves, but it's a managed decline, and I think we regularly report into Audit Committee in terms of adequacy of reserves. I'm broadly comfortable on the levels of reserves at the minute. We are not looking to extensively use earmarked reserves for the budget going forward, and for good reason. School balances are challenging. I think you will probably, a number of you will probably have some role in terms of sitting on boards of governors. You'll be familiar with challenges that schools are facing. And as Cabinet Member for Resources, Phil sat next to me. Phil will confirm that in terms of the time that he spent with schools that are in deficit, there are arrangements in place around recovery plans to arrest those positions. So for me, that's what I was sort of going to give you some broad overview on, just in terms of month 7. I'll hand across to Dave, just so he can just give you a bit of a flavour, I guess, in terms of those sort of headlines and the matters that probably you need to be drawing your attention into from an enterprise perspective.
Thank you, Pete. Sorry. Thank you, Pete. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Just a few points to pick up from what Pete has already mentioned. We mentioned the Capitalisation Directive. There's actually around £700,000 worth of revenue spend relating to the Select Committee that we're going to passport across the capital. That is highlighted in the table in 3.99. You mentioned about capital slippage. Of the 1.772 million that the authority is anticipating to slip, there's around about £1 million of that relates to this Select Committee, and that's predominantly around our car park redevelopment costs. The main part of that is the car park for J Block, so for County Hall. That's obviously going to be moved into next financial year. We've also got slippage on our Granville Street car park and £150,000 slippage on general car park upgrades. The Granville Street car park has been delayed, I think, due to environmental issues, so it's still ongoing with that. And the general car park upgrades have been delayed because of the county-wide car park review. So if we then move to Appendix 1, obviously this is provides a little bit more detail on the services that fall under this Select Committee. The portfolio is forecasting overspend by £719,000. You'll see a breakdown there. So we've got an underspend of £56,000 in our business growth and enterprise. Mainly that's down to vacancy savings. Plan and housing, we have a £312,000 overspend. That should really read planning and housing and car parking and highways development. That's moved under that department. But we've got two issues within this area. Planning fees are below anticipated budgeted targets, so we have an overspend on planning, and we also have a deficit on car parking of £250,000. Two areas within car parking: the actual pay and display income. We have a shortfall against our budget, and also our civil parking enforcement income. That's down below expected levels. Obviously, members are aware that we took on civil parking enforcement this year. The team, I wouldn't say slow to get off the ground, but with regards to pulling in income, we provided the first 2 months, not free, but we provided warnings to drivers, so they weren't actually fined. It's taken a bit of time for the team to get off the ground, but I think we are now up to full complement. So we are seeing an improvement in that area through the year end. Tourism, leisure and culture, we have an overspend on Mon Life of £109,000. The main area there is our outdoor education service. We're struggling in our income, and we've also got some redundancy costs of 40,000. That is now going through service restructure. That is why there's redundancy costs. You also note that that figure includes savings that were built into the Mon Life budget in relation to them going outside into an alternative delivery model. Obviously that didn't happen, but those savings were still built into the budget, so they've had to deal with those. What has helped offset that is the this year's income relating to the VAT Ealing VAT windfall that has been assumed that's going to come into this financial year, so that's helped offset the overspend. And then operations, well, operations are made up of a few departments. So we have our catering section is underspending. We've got a £50,000 surplus. Meal numbers are up, or they're at anticipated levels. So we're seeing our income is healthy. Transport and cleaning are breaking even. Passenger transport, we have a £405,000 deficit. There are a few areas with passenger transport. Let me just. So we have again, into this year's budget, we built in some over £100,000 worth of savings relating to DPS tendering, which is the system that we use to contract out the routes to operators. We assumed we'd make some savings from that. We have made some savings, but not as much as we thought. We've also got issues with vehicles breaking down. If a bus breaks down, we have to hire one in to obviously put the route on. So we have got a little bit of issue with our fleet. Some of them are aging, so we do see some high repair costs. Obviously, we have some overspends on our ALN contracts. Again, that's sort of out of the passenger transport unit's control. If pupils come in from outside the authority that require specialist transport, that has to be funded from the department's budget. We don't get any additional funding for that, so that is an overspend. But obviously, PTU, they are looking at managing these shortfalls. There's actually a working group set up to look at how we can change routes, route optimization, how we can cut costs. So they are working hard in trying to sort out the problem. Elsewhere than operations, waste and street scene, £61,000 deficit. A few issues. We've had to hire in some vehicles because a couple of our vehicles failed a Lola check, so we had to bring some hired vehicles in to offset those. We've also seen higher gate fees as well, so there's a £61,000 overspend, and we've got an underspend on our highways department of an underspend of £169,000 on highways. That is made up of a few areas. Our street lighting section is underspending by £55,000. We are starting to see the benefits of the LED lamps that we're putting in, so our energy costs are now coming down. And also highways operations is underspending because we decided early on in the year that we were going to passport qualifying spend across to our highways capital budget to release revenue funding. So table 1.2, there was £1.48 million for the savings issued to the Enterprise Directorate to make this financial year. The main shortfalls, car parking income. We didn't bring in the car park price increase until January. It was assumed in the budget that it would be brought in from April the 1st. I've already mentioned about PTU, where we'd built in a large amount for savings from our tendering, DPS tendering. Unfortunately, that didn't materialise. And also I mentioned about the Mon-Life. We'd assumed £264,000 savings as a result of outsourcing. And of these, 205 are deemed unachievable. And then table 1.3, we have Francis's director's commentary, so it provides a little bit more detail, a little bit more perspective. And that's about it. And then obviously at the bottom, there's a small element of social care and health that falls into this select committee, which is public protection, and that's a small overspend of £6,000. That's mainly due to the inability to achieve the vacancy factor saving. So I think that's it. So we'll be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Peter. We open into questions now, members. Councillor Eason.
Yeah, thank you. Just two questions. One on your comments regarding the Ealing judgment. You pitched the middle of 1.9, the lowest will be 1.7, the highest 2.1. If it gets to 2.1, it finishes up with a £500,000 surplus. If it gets to 1.7, it's zero. How confident are we of getting any of that? Are we clearly confident that's going to come back, or some of that's going to come back to us? It's a big chunk of money. And the second question, I don't know if it appears to be within this remit of this group, but on page 111, Crick Care Home, I noticed that there's been a slippage there, 171,000 into next year. Work doesn't seem to have started on that particular site. If by the end of the next financial year we don't start to spend that money or get into real debt to spend it, we could lose a grant from the Welsh Government. Is that correct?
Okay, so I'll pick up in respect to both of those. First off, just in terms of I guess reinforcing the point that I touched on, just to do with Ealing and VAT recovery. So just to be clear, there is a range of potential recovery between 1.7 and 2.1. We're currently forecasting in 1.9, the mid-range. The risks are more around the very old elements of the claim, because this goes back many years. And the older the claims go back, as you would naturally expect, the ability to be able to put our hands on the level of detail that custom require is more and more difficult. So we need to model scenarios based on a set of assumptions and the information that we do have. So there is always degrees of risk around whether that customs will accept that position. So, we've had, as I said earlier, we've had advice from KPMG, who are our advisors, and they've, provided us good levels of comfort and reassurance that we're in a very strong position. Clearly, if we do go beyond the 1.9 that we're currently forecasting, well, that's great. And that will either be used to benefit the end-of-year outturn position, offset against any further pressures that may come to the fore in the remainder of the year, be very welcomed. In terms of Crick Road, yes, there is a degree of slippage. That's just simply been as a consequence of, in terms of Melin, the planning application working its way through and being approved. So things are moving ahead now, and as expected. I've not got any real level of concern. There was identified risks around elements of funding, but that's more to do with the care home replacement, the Sevenview care home replacement. So for those of you who know, in terms of the Crick Road development, there's two aspects to that. One is us working with Melin in terms of putting just shy of 300 houses in situ. And the second aspect, and working with social services colleagues, is putting the replacement care home on that site. So the potential risk around funding is to do with the latter rather than the former, but we are managing that situation at the minute through ongoing conversations. Comfort and reassurance has been provided to Welsh Government.
Are you content with that, Councillor Eason? Yeah, okay. Councillor Becker.
Thanks, Chair. It's on the Ealing ruling income as well, really. You're right that this is going to feed into the next bit that we do. So, the numbers that you're talking about for that, is that purely you're talking about the historical aspect? One-off historical aspect related to that? Okay, well, I'll save my questions till the budget scrutiny part then. I just wanted to make sure that we get it.
Not a question, just a statement really. I think a lot of what I've got on my sheet, and I got 3 sheets of it here, relates to the first document and the second document. So perhaps we'd be better off going through that first and then asking the questions after, rather than jumping back and forth, I think.
I've got a question, and it's probably to Peter, on the commercial property income. You've obviously highlighted Castlegate. There's obviously an issue there of under-occupancy, but I think it was at the last council meeting, it might have been the leader who said that our investment in Spetty Park is doing well. Can you possibly flesh out a little bit more on that, Peter, and see how it's sort of balancing up between the two, and obviously any implications then in terms of Innovation House and what that might mean. To be honest, that might be in the next agenda item, but it'd be interesting just to flesh that out. Thank you.
So what I'll do, I think, given the nature of the question, I think if Dave, if you're happy to just give the sort of broad headline numbers, and then I'll bring some context around that, if that's okay. You okay with that, Dave? So whilst maybe I'll flip it around. So I'll flip it around. So you're absolutely right, Chair. We are having outperformance in terms of our investment in Spitty Park. So as members would expect, and in terms of positioning levels of commercial income generation in our budgets, we set that prudently. And clearly when we're making investments, that's predicated on due diligence and robust business cases being brought to the fore. And again, that point, re-emphasising this point of prudence in terms of the levels of income that we are looking to generate. So in terms of Spitty, we've had strong occupancy, and the levels of commercial income have come through ahead of, I guess, the baseline projections that we factored into the budget. The converse situation, as the Chair's just alluded to, is with Castlegate. So just to emphasise a couple of hurdles to clear here, just in terms of commercial income. We are borrowing, as you're all aware, in order to acquire investments, and we are making commercial gains over and above the cost of that borrowing. So with Castlegate, even though we are carrying some voids at the moment with some of the lettings, we are still generating sufficient commercial income to offset our overall borrowing cost. Where we're just falling slightly short at the moment is that we've had a couple of voids arise, which has led to us not hitting the target that we set ourselves within the budget. But again, going back to Chair's point, overall, I think Dave will be able to confirm. I think we've done fine. So balanced portfolio and all that, making sure that we've got we've got diversification of our risk across our portfolio. It was very much the reason as to why we did actually make the investment in Spitty in and alongside Castlegate, and again making sure that we've got that proper spread of risk. Dave, I'm not sure whether you want to just provide some clarification just on some of the sort of headline numbers.
Yeah, Pete's right. So the under-recovery on income on Castlegate is offset by the over-recovery on income on Newport Leisure Park. I've got a couple of thousand variance between the two. Just for the voids in Castlegate, we're running at an 88% occupancy. So we've got 10 vacant units at the moment, and obviously Alder King are working to fill them. So hopefully, as those get filled, our income will increase. Okay, thank you.
Just the final point, because the chair did you referred to Innovation House as well. So just to close that one out. So we have had delays in terms of moving staff across from Innovation House and across to J Block, and consequence of that is it's blunted our ability to be able to actually bring Innovation House forward more fully, and in terms of obviously letting that, and again for commercial income. So we are seeing some budget pressure in the current year, but I think consistent with Dave's point in terms of Castlegate, we will proactively now move forward once staff move across now this year in order to obviously get that fully let. So it's very much seen as a time-limited issue and pressure. It's good to see that the issue that was holding us up around the car park and putting the additional car parking spaces here in Usk, that is now overcome, and our colleagues from Property Services are now obviously getting all the contracts in place and the contractors on site to move forward with that. I'm not going to provide an exacting date at the minute because that's just being worked through at the moment. But I would expect some form of communication coming out to both staff and members shortly, just to provide some clarification on that.
Thanks for that, both. Just in terms of Castlegate, then, for those tenants who are already in, how confident are we that that obviously that they're going to stay? You obviously won't be privy to their business plans and their various budgets, but be confident that the rest of that sort of 88% are there for the medium to longer term. And what is the tipping point in terms of percentage then that we get concerned about if there's any further under occupancy?
So our the original business case was predicated on 90% occupancy and that's from memory. As Dave said, that we're just falling just slightly short of that at the minute. We have one core anchor tenant in Castlegate with whom we have and maintain very regular contact. We do carry a risk and a known risk around Castlegate in terms of that there is a break point, a review point on the lease with that anchor tenant in the next year or two. But as things stand, and again going back to the ongoing discussion and communication, we don't see any real risk around that. The company is performing very well. I don't think the Brexit risks, as they're now manifesting, will unsettle that company, based on conversations I've been involved in of late.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Davis.
Just a little word about the investment. We, the Labour group, without bringing politics into this discussion, supported the investment strategy, and we still support the investment strategy. I think it's important, Paul has brought up an important item though, because members need to be informed about that investment and the returns that are coming off those investments, and perhaps that's something, I understand there's new legislation coming in April from the Welsh Government, which will compel the authority to do those sort of things. It's important, if we are going to back these things and invest in these things, that the council has feedback on what's actually happening in terms of performance, I think.
Absolutely. And the openness and transparency is absolutely key around this. So just to provide members comfort, that responsibility does fall to Audit Committee. So a report will be making its way onto Audit Committee. We're trying to hit, if it doesn't go to the next Audit Committee, it will be certainly in the one, I believe will be positioned in March. But that will look to provide, that, as you touch on, that level of openness and transparency around the level of performance around our investments. Also, I guess, a reflection 2 years on in terms of our investment strategy and as to whether we need to afford any adjustments to that. And making sure that our governance arrangements around it remain robust, or if there does need to be tweaks, making recommendation on those. So I'm comfortable with that. In terms of the point around Welsh Government, legislating. It's more around guidance, and they are in effect mirroring the guidance that was brought in England. No issue with that, in all honesty. I think that's really just to curb some of the, be careful with my words, some of those authorities in England who have invested significantly. And I know that has brought questions to the fore in the press, and I know that Whitehall has looked at that closely. And I think the guidance is in effect a response to that. SIPFA itself has also brought forward guidance, and we will be looking to reflect on that guidance in making sure that our arrangements are appropriate and robust going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other further questions then? I'll just briefly sum up. Obviously, it's a really challenging position, and when we move on to the next item, looking at mitigation, I'm sure councillors will have a lot of questions. We touched on Ealing and whether or not, in terms of that VAT return, how much potentially that could be, and offsetting the future pressures. Hopefully, it's going to be at the medium to top end, which will be really helpful. Crick Road, we've touched on. I know Adult Select Committee also looked at that, because exactly the same question I asked as Councillor Eason just asked, about ensuring that capital spend was not lost. And then obviously looking at commercial property as well in terms of our investment strategy, a really important one, because I know obviously members of the public are always concerned where their council tax money is not invested in what they perceive to be frontline public services. So we need to ensure that that investment is making good returns and providing us with a strong revenue stream moving forward. So any other issues, no recommendations for this? Are you happy to move on to the next item? Yeah. Okay. So the next item then on the paper is item 4. So we're going back one, which is the scrutiny of the draft capital and revenue proposals for 2020-21 within the context of the four-year medium-term financial plan. Who's going to kick? Are you going to kick this off, Phil, or you, Peter? Peter? Okay.
Yeah, sorry, members. It's me again. So I think, again, touching on this point of order and sequence, and as I think Councillor Becker, Councillor Davis has referred to, sort of this crossover in terms of sort of questions that may be had across month 7 into the budget. So obviously we've framed the current in-year challenges. We've just been through that just in terms of month 7. And as you would naturally expect, many of those pressures and the pressures that I've described are carrying through into next year. It's amidst, I guess, a set of wider challenges, and the sort of headline point, which is referred to in 3.4, recommendation 3.4 of the report, is the totality of pressures that we're having to manage and contain. It's just shy of £10 million, and for an authority of our size and scale, I think you could probably understand that that's pretty significant. And I guess the narrative around the budget has been one driven principally around social care and ALM, because that is in effect what is at the heart of it. So it has been a very challenging process for officers, and working in conjunction with Cabinet to bring forward what we feel to be a robust set of proposals, savings proposals, that looks to respond to the pressures that we're having to manage and contain, and how that works through the MTFP model. You will all be aware that our responsibilities, my core responsibility as Section 151 is to ensure that we arrive at a position in March where we present a set of balanced budget proposals, and that allows us to set council tax in the chamber on the 5th of March. So it's important just to note that when the proposals went out in consultation, when they were released from Cabinet on the 20th of December, that was not a fully balanced set of budget proposals. We still have just over £1 million budget shortfall to manage. So the job is not yet done. It's also worthy to just note, Scrutiny forming a very key and integral part of us finalising the budget proposals. We are out on budget consultation at the moment. Consultation started on the 20th of December when Cabinet approved the draft proposals, and that consultation period continues until tomorrow, 31st January. So we have held an array of consultation events, cluster meetings with town and community councils, specific budget consultation events for the public, both in the north and the south of the county. We've had very specific targeted budget consultation events with head teachers. I know Councillor Murphy is attending the school budget forum late this afternoon. There's been events with young people. We've had a specific targeted event with the Access for All Forum and the Over 50s group. So we've made sure, as much as we can in terms of our bandwidth and our ability to be able to go out and meet with as many people as possible and to engage in discussion and to get feedback on the proposals. Suffice to say, I think that probably the main point of feedback has been around our proposals to take a 2% saving against individual school budgets. We've had a fair amount of feedback on that, and I know Cabinet are actively listening to that, and have charged officers with finding solutions, alternative proposals. And just again at headline, it's important to note as well, just in terms of council tax increases, this has been a difficult one. Our modelling scenario had originally been 3.95% increase. The very fact and the extent of the challenges that we are facing next year has taken us into a position where council tax has had to provide additional contribution. So we are seeing a 4.95% increase being proposed at the moment. So I want to probably just touch on, just briefly, some of the backdrop stuff. Both in 4.5 of the report, sort of at a headline level, you will get an understanding in terms of what makes up the £9.742 million pressure. And as you can see and reflect on what we talked about in terms of month 7, adult and children's social care is featuring most significantly. That's £5.5 million of that £9.7 million pressure. The ALM pressure continues and grows. We have £1.5 million pressure within ALM. And beyond that then, pressures centred around the teachers' pay and pensions increase, which again continue on and into next year. So, anybody with a basic grasp of maths, you will see there in itself that 8.2 million of that 9.7 is just singularly contained, within those areas. Further detail to those pressures is contained further on in the report in 4.18. But I think it's worthy of note that there are certain pressures that are being contained vis-a-vis enterprise, and it won't be a surprise to you that they again position themselves around the areas of pressure that the Directorate is facing. So again, PTU is featuring, car parking income is featuring, planning income is featuring, and in terms of the challenges that are being faced around those. But again, happy for Dave to sort of expand on that, and if Frances feels she wants to offer sort of an early perspective, I'll leave that to them both. In terms of savings proposals, and clearly, in arresting the budget gap and the shortfall, we've had to really work very, very hard. And I touched on earlier in the conversations around month 7, this ongoing desire to protect frontline services. Cabinet have given officers a very, very clear task in terms of ensuring that that remains the case. And as you'll see in 4.22 of the report, hopefully pretty self-contained is a précis of the most significant savings proposals that make up the £8 million. We have benefited, and certainly in terms of the modelling, that features in the draft budget proposals. And just to bear in mind, the provisional settlement from Welsh Government came in a matter of days before we took the draft budget proposals into Cabinet. So the proposals that you're seeing here do not take the full effect of the provisional settlement we got. So whilst we did get a 3.0% increase in our core funding from Welsh Government, we were, and it's been well publicised, we were the worst funded council in Wales again. Our very close neighbours Newport were the highest funded council with a 5.4% increase. And we have been lobbying as a council and with the WLGA to lobbying both the First Minister and the Minister for Finance to reconsider the position around a funding floor, because there are a small number of authorities, us and I believe four authorities in North Wales, who are particularly disadvantaged by the way that the distribution of funding is spread out. So we are continuing to put pressure on Welsh Government around that. We have asked for a 4% floor to be put in. If that was approved, just to give you a bit of an understanding, a bit of context, that would bring roughly about £1 million of additional funding back into the authority. So in terms of some of the numbers we're playing with here, that could be really, really key and critical to us closing the budget proposals out. As we spoke about in month 7, 4.22 bullet 2, we are continuing to make use of the flexibilities around capital receipts, capitalisation direction. Just over £1 million of further costs we're looking to displace from revenue into capital. It's worthy on just touching on the third bullet, the point around income generation from new charges and increase in existing charges. In the main, Dave can correct me, it's increases in existing charges in the main, and generally in line with inflation. I know enterprise itself within the array of proposals that are being brought forward, quite a number of those relate to fees and charges. Touched on obviously the 2% saving against individual school budgets, so I don't need to really dwell on that much further. The increase in council tax I've touched on, that's bringing just over £500,000 of additional income in. We have undertaken a review of earmarked reserves. I did touch on earlier about the very low level that they're at, but we have taken a high-level review and rationalisation of reserves. We do have the opportunity to prudently release £400,000 from the Treasury Equalisation Reserve. We have taken advice from Treasury advisors around that position and making sure that we've at least got sufficient buffer in place for any fluctuations that we may have around Treasury. We are fortunately benefiting from the most recent actuarial review being undertaken on the pension fund. We have, together with other authorities who make up, other local authorities who make up the Greater Gwent Torfaen Pension Fund, we have negotiated to freeze the employer pension contribution for the next 2 years. So we do benefit from that by 370,000. We're also benefiting from the number of properties, chargeable properties that are coming onto our books in the county. We are benefiting from that growth in the council tax base. So again, we've introduced 322 grand around that. And the remaining couple of items then concern updates in our treasury budgets, which has introduced the opportunity to bring a couple of £100 grand's worth of savings forward. And furthermore then, set alongside the significant pressures we've got in children's services, steps that are being taken to mitigate and manage costs. One is around investment in childcare solicitors. So rather than us actually spending significant costs in terms of putting that out externally. We're looking to bring that expertise in-house, and obviously with a consequential saving resulting. And finally, some ongoing investment in the MIST project, which don't expect members of this committee to have any level of familiarity with, unless they sit on Adult Select. But that is a joint working arrangement, which again looks at ways to offer different solutions to our looked after children, and that can have the benefit of them possibly not, for example, going out into an out-of-county placement, looking at actually more better and more appropriate arrangements for them that's maybe closer to home. So again, savings that are brought to the fore there. So I don't really want to go on any further than that. Just to sort of highlight the point in 4.28 that I made earlier, we are still carrying a £1.178 million gap. Still work to be done. I'll hand over to Dave now just to sort of touch on those both savings and pressures that relate specifically to this, to both Strong Communities and Economy and Development Select Committee members who are here today. Hand it over to Dave, and then clearly very happy to respond to questions as they come.
Thank you, Pete. So there's an attachment to the report that details the pressures and savings that fall under this select committee. Sorry, pardon me. You see, obviously, just for clarity, the pressures on the left and the savings on the right. You will note that there are pressures in here that do relate to overspends from this financial year. They're carrying forward into this year. I'll run through the main ones briefly. If we touch on the first one, which is £25,000, sorry, I'll go through the pressures first. I mentioned earlier that street lighting underspent this year is forecast to underspend. One of the reasons for that is we are now actually building into our budget build an element of energy increase. Historically, non-pay expenditure in budgets has been flatlined, so street lighting always used to struggle. When energy jumped up 20%, 25%, that was a big hit on their budget. So that's been built in. I think that carried forward from last financial year. You'll see we have a £98,000 pressure for Mon-Life investment. This formed part of a council report that went to members in September. So through that business case, that business plan, it was identified that Mon-Life would require £98,000 worth of more investment next financial year. The same with the one below, with the 41,000 for the strategic development plan. Again, that was part of the report that's been put in front of members. In order to undertake our strategic planning over the next few years, we do need investment. So that's already been agreed by members. You'll see then we go into the section that's labelled CENT 021. This relates to planning. We'll see we've built in £100,000 pressure for planning application fees. Again, planning is overspending this year because we cannot match the income target. Moving on down, we have the car parks paying display income. Again, that's one that's brought over from this financial year. We've estimated that as things stand, our paying display budget will be £183,000 short next year if we don't do something about it. We've assumed that our civil parking enforcement, now the team are up and running, and they're doing a good job. We're assuming next financial year they will reach their targets. So we're not assuming there'll be any shortfall next financial year from civil parking enforcement. And quickly moving through, we have some income deficits within highways and flooding. Again, we built in income budgets last financial year regarding income streams from PPA, which is performance planning assessments, I think, and sustainable drainage approval charges. We unfortunately haven't been able to reach those levels, so we've had to give the budget back in effect because they can't reach that income. We also have a shortfall in a flooding grant contribution from Welsh Government. Again, over the years that has been decreased, but it does fund core posts. So if the grant decreases, it obviously makes a deficit in the service. They've done very well over the last couple of years. They've been managing that, but for next year, we don't think we'll be able to manage it. And moving on down to passenger transport, again, that's one of our ones where we're overspending this financial year, and we're obviously trying to plug the gaps and the reasons why we're overspending this year. We're trying to plug those gaps for next year, mainly catchment area changes. So we'll have to be more pupils, more buses, more routes are needed. Our private hire income is showing a pressure of 50,000, and we've also discussed our maintenance pressure of 20. There's a small one in there for building cleaning, which relates to succession management. The management team of building cleaning, I don't think it's even one now, full-time equivalent. So we need to build in some form of succession management to take that service forward. And then I think the last one, that is the last one. So you can see the total pressures relating to this select committee is £764,000. Now, obviously, on the right, we then have the savings. Now, officers have been working hard. They have identified the pressures that they face, but they also have worked very hard in trying to identify savings to mitigate them. So I'll quickly go through the main ones. We're talking about planning and building control. Well, it looks like we're going to see an increase in our planning application fee. Now, that fee is set by Welsh Government and hasn't been increased for a number of years, but it looks like they're going to increase that for the first time next year. Now, that will give us an extra £60,000 worth of income. There's some smaller ones then relating to income from charging for Section 106 monitoring, fees for pre-application work. We've also got staff savings from a staff restructure within building and planning and building control, sorry. What else? We've got a large saving built in for £106,000 relating to car parking. Now, what that is, the service was given an additional £106,000 last year, mainly due to looking into additional car parking spaces, predominantly around, I think it's Seven Tunnel Junction. I don't know if members are aware, we've actually been given some additional funding to do that work from Welsh Government. So this funding is spare in effect, so that can come back next year. Moving into highways and flooding, in numerous areas, a lot of them are small, increase in charges, but we've got a £32,000 for increasing our road closure income budget. We do charge for closing the roads. Over the years, the actual income we've received has outstripped the budget target, so we're now releasing that additional income as a budget saving. Also got increases in our street name and numbering charges, Section 50 charges, all sorts of licence charges we're increasing, and they're also looking to offer design services for drainage schemes. So they're all officers are looking at ways to recover costs. So if we can charge somebody for a service, we're looking at doing that to recover costs. Then down into passenger transport, as I mentioned earlier on, they are continually looking at cutting costs, making things more efficient. So they've built in £60,000 for next year as a result of changes in route optimisation and workforce planning. And then moving on to waste, we have over £90,000 of savings built in for waste. 50,000 as that relates to the tax disc, introduction of the tax disc permit at our tips. That was one that's been brought forward from last year. Obviously, that means we're assuming that our landfill will go down because we're only allowing people who live in the area to dump their waste. And obviously, we have the two savings relating to recycling stations. We've got a saving on the waste transfer station contract review, so we managed to negotiate a drop in price on our contract with Viridor of £40,000, and then there's also the £40,000 saving relating to the closure of Usk Recycling Centre. Then quickly moving on, Highways Ops, there's a few different areas there, some small staff efficiencies. We looking to see a small saving on our winter maintenance because we're incorporating a new bit of software that will hopefully allow us to improve our pre-salt in runs. And there's some other small areas relating to earning income from plant hire reduction, and also one for provision of recycled tarmac to other local authorities. We do own some tarmac recycling machines, and we're looking to put those to use to either offer the service to an authority or let them use our machine for a rate. And the last couple, school meals price increase. We're going from £2.45 to £2.50. That should create £20,000 worth of additional income. Obviously, the majority of that will just go against offsetting increase in costs. Staff costs, so we've got pay award, we've got incremental uplift, and also assumed grocery costs. And then we got £48,000, and Pete mentioned before, relating to discretionary fees and charges. I don't know if the fees and charges report was attached to this, but that's mainly just general increases in our licenses and general charges. And the last one we have, again, it relates to social services, but it's a fee and charge increase of £189,000. I haven't got the detail of that, sorry, because it's not my area. And I think that's it. So I'll hand you back to Pete or open up to questions. Thank you.
Okay, Phil, did you want to say anything as Cabinet Member? It's great that you're here this morning, but just give you an opportunity just to add anything before we open it up to questions.
I don't think so, Chair. It's been more than adequately covered by Peter and Dave, so I think we'll just leave it for questions, if that's all right with you.
Okay, before I open up to questions, obviously members need to be mindful we are scrutinising the overall budget. We're here to scrutinise the functions within our scrutiny remit. Yes, you may be able to touch on obviously the broader overall resourcing strategy, but we need to be mindful of the chief officers that we have here. You know, if we're going to dig down on minutiae in social care and ALN in terms of education, you're not going to be able to get the level of response you may want. So just to be mindful of that when you're thinking about asking those questions, okay? Councillor Davis, you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Apologies, because I'm going to go back and forth, because a lot of it is, and I'll try and do it in some sort of sequence. The 2% saving against individual school budgets, I've got a couple of questions here. Firstly, were the head teachers consulted before that decision was made? And was the proposal subject to an impact assessment? Yeah, I've got lots of them, so you want to write them down? There's a freeze on the employer's pension contribution. How will that affect the employees' pensions over time? We're talking about increasing significantly a number of fees, and we talk about comparisons with other local authorities. Can you supply us with any details of those comparisons, how we compare with other councils in terms of those charges? The financial documentation also talks about a favourable income as a result of house building completions, and obviously that goes into the next LDP. But in terms of the investment strategy, have we considered, we spoke some time ago about a house building company, or I think Phil called it a different name, a development company. But obviously that would give us income in terms of council tax, but it would also give us income in terms of revenue from sales or whatever. Have we considered those? What concerns me, Chair, is that, and I appreciate the current situation, and you know, we support the fact that we want this RSG changed, and you know, we'd love to have this massive bundle of cash from Brexit and all those. But I'm a bit of a sceptic personally, and I think only the pressures are going to increase over time, not decrease. So I want to refer to this document which talks about the Capitalisation Directive, and that mentions in it there are a number of items in there which not only I think apply to that, but also things. What I want to ask is, has the authority actually considered partnership working, or any of the possibilities, for example, in preference to cutting school budgets? And I'm talking about preparatory work, examples of projects we could be sharing with other local authorities, preparatory work, sharing back office and administration services, collaboration to free up land, funding of cost of service reconfiguration, sharing chief executives, that's a good one. Driving a digital approach to the delivery of more efficient public services, aggregating procurement, improving systems and processes, setting up alternative delivery models. So the basic question is, there's a number of things there, and I could think of a lot more as well. Have we, in view of the fact that, let's assume that things are going to get worse before they get a lot better, been considering other things other than just looking at the traditional things we look at of cutting school budgets and whatever, because certainly there's no indication that the pressures that are on social services, and when I asked the Chief Officer of Social Services about this, it looks very much like the trends are for it all to increase pressures rather than reduce. So what are we doing in terms of the other things, in terms of what initiatives are we bringing in terms of sharing with other authorities, looking at house building and those sort of things, so to try and negate the pressures which are going to increase and not decrease.
Okay, thanks very much. If Councillor Davis, can you just put your microphone? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. So I think I've captured it into 5 discrete questions. So six discrete questions. So in terms of your first point around individual school budgets, were the heads consulted? Yes, they were. The Chief Officer for Education, CYP, met with heads in advance of the draft budget proposals being brought together. That was fed into discussions with Cabinet, and before it drew its conclusions around the release of the draft budget proposals that you've got in front of you. Clearly, that conversation has continued. Feedback has been received from parents, from schools, others, and that feedback will be taken on board. Phil, I don't know whether you want to touch on, make any further comment on that, and specifically around individual school budgets before I carry on.
Yes. We have been looking very, very carefully at that. I've made it very clear at all public meetings, and particularly to the head teachers meeting, that Cabinet's got no appetite for imposing the 2% reduction on ISBs. And we're looking at all possible measures to try and create headroom elsewhere, so that we don't have to do it. And if and when we get to the stage where we're confident that that we have that headroom, we can then consider our position on it. But it is one of the budget proposals that we've made very clear that we will retreat from as soon as, or if and I stress the word if, headroom can be found elsewhere.
Okay. The second question was, if I understood it correctly, was to do with what I'd alluded to earlier. We're taking the ability to freeze our employer pension contributions for a period of 2 years, which is giving us a 370 grand benefit as part of the budget proposals. Your question was about how that affected employees. It doesn't. The employee contributions are determined by the LGPS, Local Government Pension Scheme regulations. They remain unaffected. This is a matter of discussions with the actuary in terms of how the fund overall is performing and how our employer contributions are affected. In terms of the third point, which I think was centering around how we compare with other local authorities on fees and charges benchmarking, I don't know whether Dave wants to offer any comment, but I think my sort of general response to that is that when managers are assessing charges that relate to their individual service areas, they will clearly look at the local market. They will need to understand the cause and effect of price increases, price sensitivity in the market, etc. And yes, they will look at how they position themselves against other local authorities. But equally, given, and it depends on the nature of the fee and the charge, they will also look to compare with how they sit alongside the private sector, and particularly when they're in competition. So it's difficult to provide levels of granularity because each budget holder and each manager will be taking a slightly different assessment depending on the nature of the fee and the charge. In terms of council tax, point made around housing completions, and I think the question was centering around, the point that's been discussed in the chamber, and there was a motion put forward, I think accepted, and work has been undertaken in terms of undertaking a feasibility and assessment around the setup of a development company. That work is ongoing at the moment. We are having to be a little bit careful in terms of timing on that because, as members will all be aware, in terms of the next LDP, the LDP strategy is making its way through to council in March, early March, that's not the end of the process. So from a commercial perspective, I would want some level of clarity in terms of the opportunities that present to the council, away from the planning authority, the opportunity that presents to the council in terms of looking to either go alone or in working with others to develop housing. The conversations that have taken place of late are to ensure that it doesn't blunt our intent, is to make sure that we have a very clear grasp in terms of what we can and can't do within the confines of the authority. So we're making sure that with the strategic sites that we've got in the current LDP and that we are taking forward, that we're not constrained in what we're looking to try and cut our teeth on. And conversations of earlier in the week have drawn conclusion that I think we're pretty safe in terms of moving forward with those sites, and being quite ambitious and creative in that as well. And that will position us well then. And as I say, as the LDP looks to crystallise itself, we can then draw those conclusions around the development company. And just to highlight the point, that doesn't also apply to housing. It also applies to commercial development, because another key feature of the LDP is not just housing; it is also our employment sites. Your next point, I'm not sure whether it's a statement or a question, but in terms of Welsh Government funding and this level of pessimism, optimism applied to funding that we may or may not get in the future. Our modelling is prudently set. I think it will only be a case where, as is the case, I think, in part, but not rehearsing all the conversation around the funding floor and being the worst funded authority, but the 3% funding that we are getting through the provisional settlement sits over and above what we had modelled. And the reason for that is because we had modelled at a prudent level, and that's right to do so. The final point you made was around use of the Capitalisation Directive, and where we're able to displace costs from revenue to capital and associated with service reform. You rightly pointed out those aspects of the guidance, which are quite, and again, credit to Welsh Government in terms of, providing quite a good array of opportunities that we may want to explore. But I can provide you absolute comfort and reassurance. As we went down through that list, we were comforting ourselves, and we brought officers together from right across the authority, all service areas, in looking at that piece of work. I think looking across at France's, whilst you've got an extensive brief yourself and with mine, I think we're pretty comforted that we are exploring all the conversations that we need to. If we think that collaboration, partnership is the right solution, we are already in those discussions, or we have already entered into those arrangements. You touched on procurement. There is work already underway, as you know, Councillor Davis, and I think we're due to meet with you and the Chair shortly before, I guess, bringing something back into E&D Select on that one. So I think that, I don't have to go through each of the points that you touched on, but, I'll provide you comfort and reassurance that each of those avenues are being suitably explored.
Sorry,
I don't want to hog the stage, but I think there's a lot of very good work going on, and we're talking about the right things. And when I attended the City Deal Scrutiny meeting for Paul in Caerphilly, Kelly spoke about opportunities for grant funding within that system as well. So I think, as the Economy and Development Committee, we would like to be assured that, we are looking at all aspects of those things so that we put Monmouthshire in pole position when it comes to taking advantage of that city deal. I still have concerns about the pressures, which I think are going to increase significantly. So it's very important that our economy, our business strategies are pushed to the maximum, I think. And very briefly, even though it doesn't come under your remit, well, I've got a very large bee in my bonnet about the inadequacy of the council systems in terms of allowing councillors to monitor against plans, targets and things. It's very difficult to access information. So in terms of transparency, I think that is something we need to look at as well. Thank you. I'll shut up now, Chair. Thank you.
Chair, there was a point about partnership working and shared offices and all that sort of thing. Yes, I think it's pretty well documented that we do look wherever it's possible to either outsource our departments to neighbouring authorities. Revs and Bens is already there. Council tax collections already there in Torvine. We provide services to other people. Legal services are also contract out, and we're getting an income off that. No, we haven't looked to share chief executives, but we are in certain cases looking at federating schools where we have joint heads. So there's an awful lot going on, and always has done. Nothing new about this at all. But at every opportunity where we can see that there's a definite saving to be made, we will do it. The big problem that you have with an awful lot of these partnerships is that other authorities just suddenly decide that they're going to withdraw. If you think of outdoor education, Gwent Music, that there's numerous examples where we've suddenly found ourselves on our own because our partners, so to speak, have just pulled out of it. So you've got to be very, very careful about trusting your departments to other authorities, just simply because you could be left high and dry.
Thank you. Councillor Eason.
Thank you, Chair. I got several questions. One comment, first of all, is the following on from Councillor Davis mentioning the pension contributions by the employers. I'm not too happy to see pension holidays, having experienced that in the past in the industry I was in, that employers taking pension holidays created an actual evaluation, which meant that some of the schemes became not satisfactory to provide pensions. That's just a comment on that. I think we should really monitor what's happening there. We're taking you through some of the topics. I'll start with the street lighting. I have asked for a full report from the street lighting to the next Strong Communities meeting, because I don't quite understand where we're going from. I know where we're going to, but I'm not quite sure where we've come from, where we've gone from sodium lights with 100% cost down to sol lights with maybe a 60 or 70% cost to LED lights where we got a maybe 20% cost on the original 100%. It doesn't add up to me. I'd like to see how it adds up to me that we've got a pressure of 25,000 this year. I don't see where. I can't see where the pressures have come from if we're making savings year on year based on the fact that we did have grants for some of these installations. I'd like more development on that, as I say, with the Strong Communities Committee. I've raised that question through Hazel to follow it through, and I think we've got a meeting coming up in the next number of weeks, but that's another matter. The other question is the waste collection. I understand the waste centres, I understand there's a consultation going on to try and reevaluate to see where we're going with that, particularly in the Usk Waste Centre. So I just leave that be as it stands. The PTU, Passenger Transport Unit, in the last 12 months, there's been several new buses bought. I don't know how much they cost, I can't remember. But it also meant that our maintenance as well with the aging fleet and costs of external maintenance have gone up. We don't seem to be pulling in the commercial side of things. We need to provide more school transport with the catchment review coming on. So with a pressure of £60,000 proposed based on workforce efficiency, etc., how long can we support a passenger transport unit in its current form when we're going to have pressure year on year on year, and somewhere along the line, a lot of these passenger transport units, buses not what, are probably going to be failing, and we need to put more money in as a capital spend. So how long can we justify running a PTU unit within house? They're my main questions, but I am pleased seeing in the report that you don't intend to increase Meals on Wheels from £4.50, whereas I read in the press this morning that another local authority at £5 a head is going to get rid of Meals on Wheels. So I'm pleased that we're keeping Meals on Wheels. So I'd like some comments about PTU particularly, and as I say, I've asked for more information at a special meeting on street lighting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eason. You'll start on pensions.
I know it was read as a comment, but I'll just make a comment back on the point around pensions and pension fund contributions. So just to be clear, and as you'd imagine, it's a lot more complicated and a lot more detail to it than this, but at a headline level, and with the actuary undertaking its full triennial, every 3-year actuarial valuation, that's just been concluded, and where the position that we're at, pension liabilities are increasing. You know, anybody who reads the press is familiar with that situation. However, what we have seen is that the investments, which are significant, multi-billion-pound investments in the pension fund in terms of the pension assets held, they have outperformed significantly over that period, far in excess of the increase in the pension liabilities. So the actuaries, in conjunction with the Pension Fund Administering Authority, which is Torvine, they have a very clear strategy in terms of a funding strategy for the pension fund, and making sure that they bring the pension fund back to a position where it is fully funded. We are ahead of the funding strategy at the moment, which has afforded us that opportunity to be able to just take a moment to just pause. We are still paying significant employer contributions. It is simply the fact that they have been held at that level for 2 years. They will then be reassessed, and we will go from there. But going back to your point, Councillor Eason, making sure, and I guess learning the lessons of the past, making sure that we have got a very good funding strategy, which in the long term makes sure that we have a sustainable and viable pension fund.
Yeah, street lighting. Yeah, we'll certainly do a report. So if Hazel can remind us, we'll bring a report to next, or to a Strong Communities Select. Regarding the grants, they're not actually grants, they're interest-free loans. So we've been taking advantage of some interest-free loans over the last couple of years. I think the last tranche that we have now, we will have replaced all our infrastructure with LEDs. So we're not seeing a huge saving yet, because obviously the saving that we're making from the energy, we're actually using that to pay back the loan. But the beauty of that with these LEDs is that they should last 15 to 20 years. Now the loan is only repaid back between 10 or 12, 15 years. So what we're actually doing, we're actually future-proofing our kit at the minute. But obviously the benefit we will see is when we start repaying the loans, and we'll start seeing the benefit from the reduced energy consumption. But it also does help towards offsetting the energy increase. So going on to the 25,000 that we built in as a pressure for next financial year, like I said before, historically the street light and energy budget was always flatlined. So you'd have the same amount year on year, even though your energy cost would be going up 20-25% a year. So this is just built in to help us cover that potential increase. Hopefully, like I said, with the introduction of all our LEDs, our energy saving will get bigger, and we might not actually need that, and we'll be able to offer it back up as a saving in next year's account. But we'll certainly do a report. We'll list out all the different loans and how long they got left, and the potential benefit that's going to come from them.
Because the further question I asked on that was the longevity of the system in terms of switching off overnight, and I understand there will be dimming systems in place to reduce them overnight, so we could possibly keep the lights on overnight. I know that individual councils have the position to request single lights at the moment, but in the long term, the longevity of the scheme with LED lights, I've asked for more information on that. Yeah.
Just picking up on the Ask Recycling Centre question first. So yes, you're correct that Cabinet have made the commitment to hold that decision taken on the 20th of December in abeyance at the moment, whilst a further consultation and engagement exercise is undertaken. We will be issuing a broader consultation with regards to household waste recycling centres and recycling to everyone, not just to the community of Usk and its surrounding areas. And we will look to gather data with regards to the use of the site, the facilities at the site, the waste composition, to gather further information for Cabinet's consideration. So the impact will need to be revised within the budget before we bring forward the final papers, and obviously the saving that's currently proposed within the budget will now need to be readjusted. So that's a piece of modelling work that we'll do to update that. With regards to PTU, we have got two arms of the passenger transport units. We've got a commissioning arm and we've got an internal operations arm. The operations arm that we run is where the market cannot provide services for us. So when we go out to tender via the DPS or Dynamic Purchasing System process, we put all of the tenders out there for the various routes that are operated across the county. And I think there's in the order of nearly 300 routes that are operated across the whole of Monmouthshire. We, as a council, in the operations arm, only operate a very small proportion of that, but there are particular areas in the county, Caldicot being a good example, where there isn't an operator who has bid in successfully or even wanted those routes. It is an area of increasing pressure. That's due to increasing pupil numbers, increasing in demand of parents and pupils that want to access the service. We do have an old and ageing fleet, so we're looking at whether we can purchase vehicles in a different way. We have also just gone out to tender for our maintenance, so our maintenance of our coaches. We do most of our minibuses in-house, but we are going out to contract on both of those. So we're hoping that in the new financial year, depending upon the costs that come forward as part of this new tender, our maintenance costs will also go down. But it's a very complex service area with increased costs from increased demand. ageing fleet, high cost of maintenance, and we are facing ongoing significant pressures in this service area.
Can I come back on one comment on that? In terms of the smaller units, the minibuses, particularly the grassroots service. My understanding of the grassroots service currently can only operate in a 15-mile radius of a location. That is a way, it prevents the full use of the other system. For example, you can't get to Cwmbran from Caldecott. I've asked on numerous occasions for the office to look at the feasibility of, with the Welsh Government, to increase that, particularly in the rural Monmouthshire. People in Monmouth can't get to Chepstow to stroke association meetings. There's that little extra bit in the end. And also the grassroots bus service is increasingly being used by residents because we lose in the local bus services, and that's going to increase. But I hope to see that the local bus service will increase as well. So can all that be sorted out in the mix in terms of the grassroots bus and the service to the public locally, generally?
So we've just agreed at the programme board to commission a study into exactly that. So the public service buses and the community transport grassroots operations, so that we can have a full review of all of that across the county. Your points are well made, and ones that we have noted as well. We have some public bus services that aren't used very much. We have some of our grassroots services that are utilised a lot, and it's how we can maximise the use of both the public bus services in the county and the grassroots service. It's also things like the booking systems for the grassroots service. They aren't very easy to use. Sometimes when you book on them, you're on them permanently, and actually that person isn't there to be picked up. So it's the whole system needs a complete review. And within the budget mandate papers that are associated with these documents, you will see that we have included grassroots in terms of route optimisation, and that's what we're referring to there.
Thank you, Councillor Easton. Just for clarity, Francis, just in terms of that waste management recycling review, is that going to come to strong communities? I know that if the chair was here, she would ask, but just to ensure that there's going to be some element of scrutiny process there.
I'll discuss that with Carl in terms of timing and sequencing for bringing forward anything back from that. So thank you. I'll take that as an action.
Okay, thank you. Further questions? Councillor Becker.
Right, I'll start with a couple on schools. It says that we're going to cover all teachers' pay, so that's great. Does that mean we're not going to see any enforced redundancies in the schools in the coming year?
That's a matter entirely for the governing bodies of the schools. Staffing is devolved to each individual governing body.
Which brings me neatly on to my next question. Have we actually defined the legal position for governing bodies of schools in regards to setting a deficit budget? Because apparently we're not allowed to, and it's the governor's responsibility, which would lead to, I know for the, I'm governor at the Dell, and I know plenty of the governors there will leave if they feel that they're in a position where they can't set anything other than a deficit budget, but they're going to be held legally responsible for it.
I'm not sure. They can't set deficit budgets anyway. And those who have gone into deficit have all got recovery plans. But quite how the rest of that question manifests itself, I'm not sure. This is a joint stronger communities, economy and development, not a CYP. So.
And I appreciate that. It's going to be difficult to answer that question in this setting. Then, is that what we're saying? It has been asked before, so I was just wondering if there had already been an answer that had been brought about. That's all.
I'm just wondering that there might be an opportunity for a written response there.
Okay, that would be nice.
And just for clarity, I think you may have declared an interest there in terms of your governor's.
I believe we've covered before that being governor, although you don't need to declare it as an interest, but
okay.
I can be corrected on that if that's
okay.
If that's
sure the monitoring officer will send me a message very shortly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The other one is one of the budget intentions regarding the schools is the possibility of school loans to those in deficit situations. That sounds to me like giving a credit card to somebody who's in debt. Can you explain to me what the logic of that would be?
I'll do that one, Chair. The idea is that that schools that are in deficit can access up to 10% of their annual budget and utilise that to repay their deficit. That then is repayable, probably interest-free, but we are going to have to borrow some of the money. Some of it we'll do internally, but we're going to have to borrow some of the money, so there will be a cost to that. But anyway, the intention is to try and do it interest-free. They can then spread that over 10 years, or up to 10 years. They can repay it quicker if they want to. The big advantage is, and let's just take a relatively straightforward example. If you've got a school with a deficit of 400,000, we've given all the secondary schools an extra year. They're supposed to repay any deficit over 3 years. We've extended that to 4. So they're, you know, just to say simple maths, they're going to have to pay, should we say, 100,000 a year. Or something that works out in that area to get back into recovery over that period. If they take a loan to wipe that out and spread it out over 10 years, they can substantially reduce the amount that they got to find each year, and therefore any savings that they were going to make, potentially they can reinvest in standards or extracurricular activities or whatever they want to do. As I said earlier, they don't have to do it over 10 years. They can pay it quicker if they want to. So it's given schools the opportunity of being far more flexible with their recovery plans. If they go into deficit once they're on a loan basis, the authority will take back their budgetary control from them. So they're not allowed to go into overdraft once they've cleared it with a loan.
Well, I commend the notion of it being interest-free. I think that's excellent. But at the same time, it seems difficult to imagine a situation if you're in a downward direction where you would be able to afford the repayments on top of what you're already doing. But I appreciate the notion of it being interest-free.
If I can just add to that, Chair, you'll find that the majority of them are not in a downward direction. They all got recovery plans which they're successfully sticking to. I won't say it's been easy, but they are. Schools go into deficit for all sorts of reasons. It's absolutely not to do with bad management. It's invariably to do with fluctuating pupils numbers, different grants, all sorts of external factors that schools have to manage that aren't necessarily within their immediate control at the time.
No, I would agree that it's outside of their control. In fact, I think our schools do an absolutely incredible job of managing their finances and providing the highest quality of education they can, with an ever-shrinking pool of resources. So I really do, I applaud them on that. In terms of other questions, I have two which are really related to, part of what we do. This is much more within our remit, you'll be pleased to know, Chair. So part of what we do in economic development is we look at the wider picture and how things sort of interact with each other. And I worry about how we're defining the pressures when we look at these budgetary settings. So let's take the Ealing judgment as an example. Because of the Ealing judgment, we're in a position that we can add 20% extra, a VAT charge to community groups that are using our leisure services. Now, I'm not going to argue the toss about whether we can do that. I would say that the judgment was intended to be non-discriminatory and also to compare commercial and non-profit services, and it's supposed to be taken on a case-by-case basis. I think we're applying it wrongly, because what we're looking at is the bottom line of the amount of money that we're generating, and what we're inadvertently doing is pricing out community groups from using our services, which is in direct contradiction to both MCC's and the PBS and Welsh Government's wellbeing objectives right at the beginning of the budget outline. So I feel that we're not taking into the account, we're looking at the bottom line and we're not taking into account the pressures of what we're doing to well-being. Similarly, beyond that is the parking set of pressures. We talk about the income being the parking pressure. I'm slightly confused there, so you can answer. This is going to be a daft question that you'll easily be able to answer. My understanding was that we couldn't raise revenue from parking, so why is income from parking the primary concern of how we measure whether parking is working or not, and how that informs our parking strategy? That makes no sense at all. Plus, my own ward has 5 car parks in it, which the prices are going up, and I also have the train station, but we're actually looking at our transport strategy, we're looking at our well-being priorities, and we're looking at our house building strategy, and we're dissuading people from using the train because we're increasing the car parking charges. It doesn't feel like joined up thinking. It feels like the pressures that we're listing against the savings are actually drawing on the wrong metrics. So perhaps some reassurance and some answers in those regards.
Okay, so I'll touch on the point around Ealing ruling in the first instance, and then in terms of car parking, Francis, you okay to cover that off? Because it's a matter in terms of being couched within the car parking strategy that's due to be looked at. So Francis can elaborate on that now in a minute. In terms of the Ealing ruling, point well made. We've had representation through David Davis MP in recent weeks around that very point. It's being looked at and worked through at the moment. I guess in part an unintended consequence, in part. But you're absolutely right. There are groups and associations who previously would have had the benefit of being able to recover the VAT, and now, because obviously of the situation we're now in post-Ealing, they are not. So we're just working that through at the moment, just to understand the cause and effect, those groups affected, and we will look to consider, a response to that in due course.
With regards to car parking, the increases in car parking charges were matters that were agreed last year as part of last year's budget setting. It has taken us time to implement those changes, and they now have started in most of the car parks. The ones that are currently free, I think there's 4 that were proposed to have new charges introduced. We are ordering signage for them, so they haven't been implemented yet. Going forward, we have put forward a pressure of £183,000 budget pressure for car park income, because we have seen year on year that we aren't achieving the level that was originally set. Obviously, these income targets for car parking are set on various different models of what we think we can achieve. It's very difficult to know what cars are going to come in and how long they're going to stay there. So there are income targets that have been set that we haven't been able to achieve. In last year's budget, we committed to doing a car parking strategy and review, and that is a holistic review. It's not just about the income, it's about the use of the car parks, it's about the impact of car parking on town centres and town centre footfall, it's about how long people are parking in the different car parks, it's the introduction of EV and EV charging spaces, and how that integrates into the wider transport network as well. So we are dealing with the current set of circumstances immediately, but looking at that wider picture as part of the car parking strategy review. I understand, Chair, that that's come into this committee as a joint piece of work also of Strong Communities and Economy and Development Select, and welcome that dialogue as we go forward, because I think this is a critical point for us now as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. I mean, in some ways, it answers my question, and it's nice to know that piece of work is going to be coming on. If there's any way that I can be involved, being in a ward which is a commuter ward with 5 car parks and a train station, I would like to be. It does still worry me, I think, because we look at the pressure as you're naming it there, and it's not taking into account those factors. So I think it does still worry me that the wrong decisions are going to be made in this budgetary year, because we won't have done that piece of work to inform what we're going to do going forward in the budget. But I mean, there could be a environment, I suppose, some kind of space.
But I would stress that there are no proposals within this budget to increase car parking charges, none whatsoever. So the comment you made just now can't apply.
I'm actually more concerned about reducing them rather than putting them up again. I think that the damage is already done by putting them up, and especially the fact that it's been taken in such a geographically intense way that Chepstow suffers the most from having the most paid car parks and very little free parking provision, in an area where we're supposed to be encouraging more footfall and public transport use. So I think that damage has already been done. What I want to do is actually see us make some decisions going in the right direction to reduce charge, provide more free capacity, and work towards our well-being and climate goals. So.
Well, that'll have to be part of the ongoing exercise, because again, there are no car parking proposals in this budget.
Thank you for that, Councillor Roden.
Thank you, Chair. Is my understanding correct in thinking that aspects of some funds, such as aggregate external funding, are unknown at present? And if that's the case, what degree of confidence do we have that we receive them? And if we don't, what would the impact be? Thanks.
We haven't had, Peter will come in on that, but we haven't had our final settlement yet, which ordinarily we would have had. But the general election put paid to all of the timetables on that. So no, we don't have our final settlement. We have to rely on information coming out of Welsh government, and we will have to settle council tax only a day or two after probably hearing what the final settlement is. But I don't know what Peter wants to add to that.
There's only just one further comment, just to add, actually, in a perverse sense, the fact that the provisional settlement was so delayed, in an ordinary year, when we didn't have the likes of the election taking place, the delay in the spending review working its way through from Westminster. So in an ordinary year, the provisional settlement would have been received a good couple of months earlier, in sort of October time. The provisional settlement wouldn't have contained all the up-to-date data that the settlement team needs to feed through the settlement formula. So they would base that on a set of assumptions, thus it being provisional. Because the settlements come through late at the end of December, virtually all of the data that they need, Welsh Government, was included. So the Welsh Government, I was in discussion with the Welsh Government official week last Friday, and they confirmed that in fact they're not expecting to see any real movement now between provisional and final, which gives sort of a level of comfort in terms of the figure that we're sort of modelling in terms of the 3% increase. Funding floor aside, there is a high level of certainty that that will not change.
Thank you. That's reassuring. And secondly, if I may, coronavirus is in the news all the time. The issue may well escalate. Do we have any thoughts of the impact of that on us, bearing in mind that a lot of Chinese manufacturers supply things to this country and they may be impacted? Thank you.
The easiest answer is no. The WHO, the World Health Organization, hasn't declared it hasn't been escalated to that stage yet. So clearly they're looking to contain it within China. I guess if circumstances change, then I would expect UK government, Welsh government, to put in place necessary arrangements in terms of assessing that, and that risk would then subsequently be assessed down at a local authority level. Very similar to, I guess, arrangements that were put in train around Brexit most recently. But in terms of an immediate risk, no, we're not not undertaking any specific targeted work at the minute in terms of working that through, and I could probably offer a view that it would be very, very difficult to actually assess what that consequence and implication might be at this stage.
Councillor Strong.
Thanks, Chairman. It's just a quick comment on the Usk amenity site. Just to confirm what Francis said, and also the Town Council and County Council are working closely together, and in addition to the county-wide literature that's going out asking for comments, the Usk Town Council are also circulating their residents, emphasising the fact that the black bags must be free of food waste, etc. And it'll be interesting to see over the next couple of months to see whether that is taken into account and the situation improves.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. Councillor Dovey, did you want to come in?
Is anybody got a hammer? Oh, here we go. Thank you, Chairman. Many of the questions that I would have wanted to ask have been asked already by Councillor Davis and others. But perhaps I would like to ask a different question. And that basically is, here we are yet again, and I've been on these committees almost longer than anybody else has. Phil and I have been here for 10 years.
2004 we came in, David, so it's a bit longer than that.
It was something like that. And we have gone through this cascading period of years where we are always at the bottom of the pecking order when it comes to funding from Welsh Government. As somebody said here earlier, we would like to be in a position with regard to the city deal where we are in pole position. Well, if you look at the past experience for Monmouthshire County Council as a county, no matter what it does, it is never, ever in pole position. It is always at the bottom of the queue. That is the norm. And I think what I find really, really so discouraging, and it must be awful for the officers, is that the years come on and we come in here and we sit down again and we go through all the same rigmarole, and basically what we're doing is bacon slicing the county and its reserves and its ability to run in a way that other counties are run when they have adequate reserves. So my question is really, how long can we carry on in this way? I mean, it is a fundamental question. We could talk about everything else that we talked about this morning. We can read all these briefs, all this work that goes into the trying to balance the books. And it is pretty heroic. I don't use that phrase lightly. Over past years, it is pretty heroic. If I was Phil, I'd probably be in a cell, dark room, with a lot of padding around it, or Phil out down in a local pub with a large bottle of whiskey. But the point I'm trying to make is the situation doesn't change for us. It gets consistently worse. And it cannot carry on getting worse. I think Phil said when we started this whole budget review before Christmas, he said we've said to the fact that we are really scraping the barrel at this time. And no council that is properly run, and this one is, should be put in a position that it is basically being punished for its success. and other councils within Wales who are not properly run are more than adequately funded to ensure that they don't end up in the position that we enjoy. So my question is, to the officers and anybody else who'd like to give it a shot, is how long do you think we're going to be able to sustain this position without somebody seeing the light in the Assembly? Or maybe, and I am beginning to subscribe to this at a large event, they have a different agenda down in the Assembly.
Thanks, Councillor Dovey. Given the political nature, it's probably reasonable for Phil to answer some of that, whether or not officers would want to add a view in terms of resource sustainability, but in terms of the political nature and in terms of potential mergers, formal mergers with other authorities. Do you want to say something, Phil?
Yes, I will, Chair, and I'll stay away from the politics as well. I think basically we ask ourselves that question every year, and it seems miraculously that every time we find, excuse me, find a way of reinventing it ourselves, that points us in a direction we hadn't seen before, and we seem to be able to do it again. But that's running out of steam. It's running rapidly out of steam. And clearly some movement in the way that the revenue support grant is looked at, well, in the whole of AEF for that matter. To that end, we're trying to persuade some other authorities to help us contribute to a fund that would enable us to get an independent examination done that can be put forward to Welsh Government to see whether or not we can persuade them to look at the formula. There's also, excuse me, there's all sorts of representations going on, always have been, and they're intensifying. But it isn't just a case of giving us more. There's pluses and minuses, and they've all got to be properly worked through. Sorry about my voice, Chair.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just want to just add a couple of things, really. I'm not going to answer the question in terms of the how long, because it's a bit of a how long's a piece of string, depending on what plays out, I guess, and there's a whole array of different factors with different degrees of certainty in terms of what may play out. We've had conversations today around social services, likely increase in demographic pressures, demand pressures, etc. And I think the translation of that, and I think in terms of where work's done between, I guess, as a local authority and with Phil, the leader, the cabinet members, and through the WLGA is this point around fair funding. And there's two aspects around that. One is around making sure that local government gets sufficient recompense for the pressures that are put upon them. So the narrative, the very focused narrative and the engagement and conversation between WLGA and Welsh Government leading up into the provisional settlement was about a fair funding package around pay and pension pressures and the pressures that we've talked about today in children and adult social care and ALN. It wasn't a wish list of 100 things, because as you'll have seen from what we've been through today, the pressures are very contained within some key areas. If we had been fully funded for those, and we had received the settlement that we had, then I reckon that we'd have been all right. We'd have probably actually taken steps to invest in certain areas and sort of get back some of our position lost. So there is that aspect of fair funding there, and then the other part, as Phil alludes to, is our fair funding as a result of the distribution in the formula. So the WLGA Rural Forum, which the leader sits on, They have agreed to undertake a piece of work to look at the formula in further detail. Our disadvantage in the formula is not singularly, but significantly driven by our rurality. So that piece of work needs working through, and the WLJ Rural Forum are being charged with undertaking that. And I'm not going to comment on other local authorities and the positions that they're in. I mean, you know, we're, I guess, lucky to have the member and officer cadre that we do in this council, and it affords officers the ability to be able to be resourceful, creative, and innovative, which is what we have been doing, and we will continue to do. And in terms of the challenges that are put in front of us, we will continue to respond to them. Yes, there are concerns and anxieties around ongoing financial sustainability, but you know, we take them in our stride. You know, we need to continue and maintain to put pressure on Welsh Government, again, back on that point around fair funding.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Dovey? Just a short response, because I've got other councillors wishing to get it to come in. Okay. Oh, microphone. Can you put your microphone on as well, please? Thank you.
I think the response made by the officer was a very professional one. And one that one would expect from an officer in Monmouthshire County Council. My own view is that there are so many things happening in and around Chepstow. For instance, there's a big demographic change in Chepstow, and it's only just when you walk across the Wye Bridge, and they are flinging houses up there as fast as you can possibly go, and that is going to have a big impact on Chepstow. So there is a lot happening, and I still maintain that we are unfairly treated as far as the Welsh Government is concerned, and as far as the funding that Monmouthshire gets. I would not rescind from that position.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dovey. I can see Councillor Harris, desperate to come in on this, and surely will counteract your arguments. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Chair. I've been here since 2004, and this comes up time and time again. I'm asking the Cabinet member now directly, publicly, as I've done many times before, are we, as a Tory-run county council, being singled out for bad treatment by the Welsh Government? Yes or no?
It's for them to form their view. It isn't mine. I don't think that it's got anything to do with their politics. It's the formula. If you want a political answer, and the distribution subgroup, we're always outvoted when it comes to that. But again, I don't think it's done on political lines.
Thank you for that, Chair, and that's the answer that I've got every time. And I don't know why Councillor Dovey doesn't believe that is the case, and I don't know why he can't comprehend. Also, if we're getting political, that from 2010, 30 or 40 billion pounds has been taken out of government by the government in Westminster. It must make a hole somewhere.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
I don't want this to become too political, because we work really well in a consensual manner. So, Councillor Eason, you want to come in?
Yes, I just would like the Monitor Office to take note that we shouldn't be in a political arena. We are a select committee, and I'm sorry that we got to this point.
Thank you for that. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. As you probably aware I don't do politics in this council. What I will say is we all recognise, I think even the Labour group recognise that there are problems with the funding formula. And if one looks at child poverty, for example, then the current funding formula, and we have evidence to show this, discriminates against those people in that category in Monmouthshire, and therefore it's not fit for purpose even in that. But I have to say, and I've said it many times in the chamber, I have looked at this funding formula, I don't know how many times until my eyes have glazed over at the end, and I'm not the brightest in the world, but I don't understand it. And I think the Labour group leader said it's as clear as mud, and I think that is the problem here. It's not very clear how these things are arrived at, and the only way to do it, as Phil has said, is through an independent review. But we have to accept that if there's an independent review, we might not get the answer that we want. So the case has got to be very strong for that, I think. And to take politics out of it, we know that even in that poverty issue, we are being discriminated against by that formula, and I think that is a good case to put forward to say it needs reviewing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Davies. And you and other colleagues on the Indie Select would be aware of our request to have the WLGA to come in to explain the current formula as it is in stream. We've asked on a couple of occasions, and I think that is now, that message has hit home with WLGA, and I'm assured that John Ray and colleagues will be coming in. It will be after this obviously this settlement, but at the end of March, beginning of April, to have a members' workshop with us, so we can start to unpick some of the elements for our own, for our own benefit, to understand the elements, notwithstanding the potential review that might be in train. Councillor Dovey, you want to come back briefly? And as I said, I do want a political element on this.
No, I was not trying to be political, and I wasn't trying to be political, Roger. I didn't mention the Labour Party at all. I said the government. That's it. That's it. I didn't say it.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Go on, Councillor Strong.
I want to extend it, but it's just that Joel Barnett was a member of Harold Wilson's government 50 years ago, and he set about drawing up this arrangement. 50 years ago, the Welsh economy was based on heavy industry, coal, iron and steel. Over 50 years, obviously, that's completely altered, and we're now into IT and light industry mainly, and tourism. So it was good in its day, I'm sure, but it has now served its time. And as Alan has said, I think that an independent review is needed. It may not be the outcome may not be what we hope for, but at least it will clear the air and probably put things right.
Thank you for that, Councillor Strong. I've got a few questions, and I suppose they're posed to Peter in terms of resource perspective. Looking at the biggest pressures around social care, in particular, and I'll have to declare an interest here as an employee of the Association of Directors of Social Services, so I'll make sure I fill in my pro forma afterwards. On the previous paper, it was said that the social care model as is isn't sustainable. The social services and wellbeing act set a train of direction in terms of person-centred care. Now, we've been recipients of the Intermediate Care Fund. We're now recipients of additional funding from Transformation Fund monies. All that is to change our service models to be more receptive to the citizen, user, carer. Given those obviously those funding models, there's an expectation, there's an exit strategy to ensure that we move away from the grant funding in that model change, and those are embedded in our future resource planning assumptions. So you said you know, we're saying that it needs to change. What more, from your perspective as chief officer, and obviously working with the chief officer of social care, can we expect? You know, we've been given money to transform services, and you know, we've seen in domiciliary care, with turning the world upside down, that we are innovative and we are changing. Is there some elements that are beyond our control in terms of engagement with health boards, wider regional work? And you know, we're seeing a huge amount of money now being levelled at regional partnership boards. There are obviously issues and questions about transparency and access to that money. You know, are we getting our share from the regional partnership boards to service our needs here? Going on from that then, in terms of looked after children, now we have committed ourselves to safe reduction of children coming into care, and we need to stress the safe reduction, because safeguarding of children is paramount. Yes, there's obviously a lot of complexity and a lot of difficulty around ensuring that happens. There are obviously elements outside of our control, particularly in terms of judicial decision making. But what, in terms of resources, do you feel the need to be invested there to ensure that that safe reduction happens? Is it more investment in terms of prevention? I know we've got team around the family working hard. We've got a lot of services in terms of educare. What additional resource can we add to that prevention agenda to stop the huge influx of children coming into the care system? And finally, in terms of ALN, you know, there was a regulatory impact assessment at the time when the Act went through in 2018. I know there were concerns raised across the board then, not just in this authority, but across Wales, in terms of the impact on local government. That was adjusted. If I remember, I'm just trying to cast my mind back, I think there was an agreement there was going to be a £20 million funding package in place. What is our assumption in terms of that central pot of money to alleviate some of the pressures in terms of ALN?
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so in terms of the first question, which is essentially centred around are we getting our share of money from health, in effect? We've got good evidence of integration. Frailty Project being but one example where we've worked well with health in terms of pooling budgets and making most effective use of resources, and where health has obviously contributed money in and alongside ours. There is still some way to go. This is just not me speaking. I think this is probably a Welsh and a national issue, just in terms of the need for the NHS and social care to work better together, and actually, in a preventative sense, money's being invested in social care to ensure that people don't end up, taking up bed space within hospitals. I'm not in a position to offer any level of detailed comment. That's probably more, it's better place for Julia's Chief Officer for Social Care and Health. But we have opened up discussions with the Health Board and in conjunction with other neighbouring authorities around continuing healthcare and making sure that we are getting our fair share of income through from that, that we're not having to stomach the full extent of those pressures or an unnecessary share of those pressures. But there are many other aspects, in the work that is done across social care and in health, where I'm sure further integration can and needs to happen. It's probably as far as I can comment, I think. In terms of looked after children and what we can do to prevent that influx, it's an ongoing matter of discussion at our leadership team, and And as you'd expect, given the significance of the challenge, we have monies invested both as an authority and in conjunction with other partners in terms of front-end preventative work. Always have a trouble with that word. You know, I think I touched on examples earlier just around children's services in terms of, you mentioned the judiciary, Chair. That presents its own difficulties and challenges, and is one causal factor for, I guess, children coming into care. You know, we look to do what we can there in being able to respond, and that's why we have invested in the childcare solicitors that we have. The MIST project, another example in terms of working initially in collaboration with another authority, and looking at, again, the best outcomes for the child, which in turn and can often lead to reduced financial pressures and burdens on the authority. So in essence, a win-win. But I guess there seems to be, from my perspective, there seems to be more of an awareness and an understanding now, just generally amongst the general public, in terms of alerting the relevant agencies to situations where children are potentially at risk of harm. And I think that is one of the causal factors for that. We just need to make sure that we are catching hold of those situations at the earliest opportunity and responding to them in the best way possible. Money is always a healthy. There's always a healthy tension between social services colleagues and finance colleagues. And in fact, you'd expect it, because you need to strike the right balance. Where if you're a corporate parent and you're in charge, you have responsibility for a child, that takes precedence in the first instance. But we do need to make sure our arrangements are as cost effective as possible. We could do more if we had more money, I'm sure. But we do absolutely make sure that we properly understand the risks that present and make sure that we resource appropriately. So if we have to invest in certain parts of the organisation and withdraw from others, then that's what we choose to do.
Sorry, Peter, and just in terms of ALN, do we have any understanding in terms of assumptions from central government?
So a week last Friday, I was in the Society of Welsh Treasurers meeting. The pot of funding around the investment around ALN was referred to. My understanding from leading officials from Welsh Government then was that the distribution formula and the allocations and the criteria around the use and application of that funding are due to be received imminently. So it may well be already with relevant officers, but I've not yet seen sight of it.
Okay, thanks for that. And this is probably more of a political question directed to Councillor Murphy, and probably burning question in terms of the public's mind in terms of increasing in council tax. 4.95 is going to be difficult to stomach, and I've raised it on, I think, last two budget debates in terms of the elasticity of council tax yield. We are, I think it was said at the last council meeting, up to 40% now in terms of income compared to the revenue support grant, which, compared to not just our regional neighbours, but across Wales, we're not just an outlier. I mean, that's just extraordinary, really, in terms of that expectation on council taxpayers in Monmouthshire to fit that bill. And I suppose it goes back to a little bit to Councillor Dovey's question in terms of sustainability. How long can we expect this to happen? Year on year, another 5%, another 5%. We've obviously outlined budget pressures. We've always said consistently, as a council, cutting services is an element of last resort. Are we at that last resort? Do we need now to think, really clearly about, obviously, in terms of statutory responsibilities, absolutely, social care, education, looked after children, but really cutting back on stuff that we don't need to do, because we can't go on like this.
Yes, you're right. We do have to collect nearly 40% of council tax. But if you look at, excuse me, if you look at the council tax collection or the rate in Monmouthshire compared to anybody else, we're pretty well on the average line. Hardly any difference. In fact, there's a slide that comes 2 slides before that one, Pete. That actually shows us the Band D equivalent of council tax in Monmouthshire. Monmouthshire's Band D is £1,315, whereas the Welsh average is £1,294. So we're not out of the way compared to other authorities. How long can we continue to increase it by around 5%? Well, that really depends on whether we get any improvement in the funding from Welsh Government. In this particular year, it depends on whether we get that 4% floor, because we've made it quite clear that if we do get the additional money, we would very seriously look at dropping that 1% extra to our original anticipated rise back to 3.95. So how long is it sustainable? I don't know. But compared to other authorities, as I say, we're not out of the way. Blaenau Gwent, for instance, levies over 1,600 for Band D compared to our 1,300. So, you know, there is still an awful lot of room, but we are virtually on the line. So, you know, if we're forced to put it up, you can pretty well bet your life that everybody else is as well. I don't know how far that goes towards answering your question, Chair, but it really depends on so many different factors. I don't want to consider chopping services off. That is absolutely the very last resort. We've made it clear that if we have to, we will, but it's certainly not our intention to go down that line. A lot would have to change to make us change that view.
Okay, I think you've answered it as best you can, Phil, given the circumstances. And I suppose, for me, understanding when the Cabinet makes a decision around budget, and you've obviously alluded to earlier on, and Peter alluded to earlier on, the levels of engagement in terms of consultation. You know, there is a lot of lobbying going on various different aspects of service function. You know, are we going to present something and then roll back from it when, you know, the heat is on, or are we going to move through and deliver those, you know, whatever the difficult decision is, you know, whether it's increasing charges or increasing council tax. I suppose it's understanding that the commitment of the Cabinet to drive that through despite pressures from external actors, agencies. Because if we don't deliver, then potentially we are storing up trouble, even more trouble longer term, if we don't do what we need to do as a council.
Well, we only levy charges because of the pressures put upon us. We certainly don't do it for any other reason. We have to balance our budget, and if that means increasing council tax, well then so be it. But it is the last resort, and as I've said, if we do get the funding floor, we won't do it. Every authority is putting their case forward now. While this meeting's been on, I've received the response that Conwy has put in. So, you know, they're doing exactly the same as us. I say we don't put anything up for the sake of it. We only respond to pressures. And the last thing that we look at increasing is the level of council tax. In the public sessions that I've done so far, I've only had one question raised by a member of the public, and that wasn't so much a question, it was a statement. In that we were failing miserably with regards to our council's tax strategy. We weren't collecting anything like as much as we ought to be, and we should substantially raise our level of council tax. That was only one person.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Murphy. Are there any further questions then before we sum up? So we've covered a huge amount of ground there. Obviously, in terms of the portfolio areas that we scrutinise, we've looked at the PTU and the issue there. Councillor Easton raised that issue along with street lighting. We've looked at waste and recycling management, and I think a number of councillors raise their concerns there. Councillor Strong, particularly in relation to USC, and we note that there's the waste and recycling review that's being undertaken, and we'll come back to the various committee responsible. We've looked at car parking charging, and obviously that the review of the strategy is currently being undertaken, and that will come back to economy and development. We've looked at those. Still in our I suppose still in our remit as E&D. We looked at obviously commercial development, understanding opportunities there with new models. Councillor Davis talked about potential development company and obviously potential regional working in terms of house building. Looked at capitalisation directives. We've looked at, in terms of outside of our sort of remit as a joint committee, we looked at around education, issues around ALN, issues around school budgets, and ensuring there's robust consultation going on with head teachers, and obviously concerns being raised around potential redundancies there, and obviously the potential 2% budget cut is what impact that could have. Although we've been given obviously some comfort with the funding, the flexibility of borrowing to reduce or eliminate the particular budget deficits, and working with council officers here, that could be an opportunity for some schools to see themselves forward in the short term. We've looked at social care, obviously the bigger funding pressures around social care, and look at particularly in terms of resourcing and modelling. I think Councillor Davis raised a number of really good issues in terms of ensuring that there's transparent information, so it allows us between scrutiny meetings and between council meetings to allow us to monitor and scrutinise milestones and targets, particularly in terms of savings, and that would be really helpful if we can look at a way of that information being developed, not just for us as councillors, but obviously for members of the public to access. Pensions, we talked about pensions, obviously the challenges, significant challenges there. Councillor Roden brought coronavirus into play, which was marvellous. But in all seriousness, I suppose it's understanding those unknown unknowns and how we are looking at risk, and obviously there was a parallel in terms of parallel working and modelling when it comes to Brexit, obviously, and no-deal Brexit risks. All that modelling and all that work in terms of understanding those known knowns and known unknowns certainly won't be lost within the resilience fora, and it will be down to those resilience fora again, potentially working with Public Health Wales if an issue arises around a public health challenge like coronavirus. I think Councillor Roden also talked about the provisional funding settlement, and obviously the challenges of having that late settlement for officers and for the Cabinet as well. I think we've covered everything. Councillor Dovey, obviously, in terms about long-term sustainability, and the question I raised as well about sustainability of council tax and obviously challenges of regional working. Obviously, there's benefits and opportunities, but I think Councillor Murphy touched on as well in terms of ensuring that our partners are committed to those potential new opportunities is also an important one. We have had instances in the past where partners have walked away from the table for a number of reasons. So there are opportunities, but there's also risks as well in increased partnership working. I think I've covered most of the stuff there. I've got about 6 sides of notes here, and I think I've covered most of that.
Chair, can I just excellent summary. I mean, just ensure that we include something about the review of our application of the Ealing ruling and its unintended consequences.
Yeah, thank you. You've just done that, Councillor Eason.
Yeah, just one, not so much clarity, but for the public who may ring in irately as saying we got our council tax wrong, there is on top of that £255 of the police precept to pay, so most people are paying that plus a bit more.
Yeah.
Yes, the 4.95 envisaged increase is only the Monmouthshire County Council element of the council tax bill.
Thanks for that clarity. So in terms of recommendations then, so it's to request this joint committee scrutinise the draft budget proposals within the context of the 4-year medium-term financial plan and the corporate plan, and offer their recommendations on the proposals to Cabinet for their consideration. Are we in a position to offer recommendations? Do anyone would like to offer a recommendation from this joint committee? Can we put anything forward that we can agree on? Councillor Eason.
Well, from the perspective of the strong community side, I would support the way forward, but with mitigating that we need to look at the comments we made about waste and things like that in the round. So generally, move forward, but keep a watching brief.
Okay, Councillor Devi.
Councillor Davis touched on it after what I had said. About this formula being a really complicated formula, and it isn't understood clearly by a lot of people, majority of people. I would like to suggest that this formula be reviewed in some way. I don't know how it should be done, but everybody agrees that well, I suppose everybody agrees that it isn't really quite right in that it isn't easily explained the way it works. And if I sounded overtly political, I really wasn't trying to be, and I purposely didn't say Labour or anything. I just know that this is happening year after year after year. Something has got to be wrong with it.
As I said before, we will be having a workshop seminar for E&D Select, but we obviously we'll widen that out and invite all members to that. I mean, in terms of recommendation, there was obviously a strong motion passed at the last council in terms of collaboration between all groups within the council to to charge the leader to look at or to support him in terms of a request of a review. Obviously we're heartened the WLGA rural forum is going to look at a part of that, but obviously an independent review is something that was obviously stressed. So obviously outside of the WLGA auspices, but whether or not we want to say, you know, we support the motion that was passed at the last council, or some sort of wording like that, where we would get, you know, push for an independent review. Councillor Davis, you want to come in on that? Okay, go on and come in on something else then.
I'd like to recommend that the authority reviews its information and management systems. So we talked about transparency, and of course monitoring systems, not only for ourselves but for the managers and for the public themselves. And obviously it gives us a better opportunity to have positive input in terms of whether we recommend different initiatives or not. Or if we got the right information, we can do it. If we haven't got the information, we can't. So I think it really needs to be reviewed because it's very poor at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, are we happy to support that recommendation in terms of review, performance management? Yeah. I suppose it's understanding, going back to Councillor Becker's question in terms of understanding how we define those pressures, and, you know, performance management is going to be an important element of that. Do we want to recommend anything around calling for a review of the funding formula, or are we happy that it's already there? You know, I think that the motion was quite robust at the last council. I don't think we'll add any additional value to that, but yeah, leave it there. Yeah, okay. So just that one recommendation. Okay, thank you. So rest of the agenda then. Thanks, officers. If you need to duck away, thank you ever so much. And Councillor Murphy as well, if you need to go. Thank you for your time. Item 6 then, to confirm and sign the minutes of the previous meeting. Is anyone happy with the minutes? Does anyone propose? Move. Do we have a seconder? Yeah, Councillor Roden will move those. Thank you very much. Item 7 then, Economy and Development Select Committee Forward Work Programme. You'll see the Forward Work Programme there. Councillor Davis.
Chair, can I suggest that we add scrutiny of the city deal to the Forward Work Programme? And you will need to address the fact that I am no longer your deputy on a committee. I've resigned. It's in need of significant work, shall we say. It's not fit for purpose at the moment. It's the most important initiative within this area for quite some time. And we can't even get members to attend. Meetings are not quorate, and some of the questioning, quite frankly, is not at the standard it should be. So perhaps we ought to consider, like some other councils, having our own scrutiny group to look specifically at the city deal and what we can get out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. I think it's a really pertinent point. Although you've stepped back as sort of my deputy on that, and you've been really helpful in terms of everything you have done. I understand your frustrations in terms of how the joint committee is working at present. It's something that I've raised with Kelly, and I know you're aware of that, and hopefully we can get a meeting with Kelly Byrne and Hazel pretty quickly, just to understand some of the dynamic there. While obviously you step back as deputy, as vice chair of the committee, I think your input would be really helpful. So if you're happy to do that, but yeah, we can certainly add that to our forward work programme. Our next LDP workshop is on the 24th. I think the last one was really good, really well attended. I think we were sort of 18 to 20 members. We're going to try and continue at the 5 o'clock mark. I know it's not applicable, or when I say applicable, not amenable for everyone. I know particularly Councillor Roden and Councillor Strong with their other activities find that challenging. I appreciate that. But we're just going to try and we want to try and get a widest membership as possible, and it seems to be working at the minute. So as you'll see, that next workshop is about the discussion around the preferred strategy, and we expect that probably to come to our next meeting formally to scrutinise that. And then you'll see, obviously, the 23rd workshop and a piece on procurement that is ongoing may well come to the 27th of February meeting. Hopefully it will. I just need to sit down with Peter and Alan just to go through where we are in terms of progress and whether or not we can bring that to the 27th meeting. Otherwise, it will be probably the March meeting. Does anyone have anything else to add, Councillor Becker?
Yeah, I struggle with that 5 o'clock thing as well, I'm afraid, on that day. There's a point from the last one, it's just a question about what happened. There's a point in there about a future meeting for people with experience of... what was it? Let me just bring it up. Sorry. No, that's the cabinet one. It was for people who have experience of sustainable housing and things like that. There was provision for a future meeting. Do we have any details on when that might be or how we can contribute to it? I'm very echoey down here today.
We haven't at this stage. We'll come back to you. We'll just check with Mark and the team on that. But yeah, your input on that would be really helpful. Yeah. Okay. Okay then. So last item on the agenda. Council and Cabinet Forward Work Planner. Anyone see anything in there that we should be aware of? We need to drag anyone in over hot coals? No? No. Okay. So finally, the next meeting, Thursday, 27th of February. Obviously, thanks for both committee members for their attendance today. Really, really helpful. Really robust session on scrutiny. And obviously, don't forget the workshop on the 24th. It'd be good to see as many people there as possible. Thank you for your time. Thank you.